Hello and welcome to the Firmware Emotive podcast, and you are listening to John Kai Herbert. On this episode, I'm going to be talking about truths, untruths, ignorance, negligence, conspiracy, logical fallacies. I'll dabble into a little bit of human design, credibility, absence of evidence, evidence of absence, and all the things that we try and use to gain clarity, security, and facts in the world. And at the moment, it feels like it's a bit chaotic. We're all trying to find meaning. We're all trying to struggle with why we are here, what's the purpose of it all, and we're looking for some grounded information to work out what's going on. Now, for those that are listening, and I'll mention someone in particular, Cassie, if you're listening to this, I'll be drinking a lot of water. So just giving you a heads up. There goes a sip right now. So what I'll start off with is mixing truth and lies. So I'll be referring to some notes as I go along. I'm just going to see how this plays out because it's deep and it's multifaceted, and it's also ties in with how the spiritual world meets the scientific world, and how we are always looking for credibility in people and things and books, and when we abdicate our authority to people that we've given credibility to, and then we've also got words that are used as pejoratives. By pejorative, it means that there's an element of an insult to it. Sorry, I just bumped my microphone. I'm flailing my hands around maniacally. And so we've used pejoratives. So these are words like that carry like a weighting, that it's almost like an insult. Well, it is an insult. So when we talk about like a conspiracy theorist, we've even started to use like science, scientist, doctor, hippie, new ager, and I'm guilty of this stuff as well, where we've started to use labels that were maybe at one point helpful, or like a loving label, or something that had honor and credibility to it, is now like not so much. So when we look at conspiracy and conspiracy theorists, the word itself was designed as to discredit. So like, if there's something that goes against whatever the current mainstream narrative is, you automatically get labeled as like a conspiracy theorist, a tinfoil hat, or whatever it is, whatever the pejorative is that is currently going around. So in that step, you actually dehumanize the other person by calling them something that is actually a pejorative, without engaging with them, or like just you don't even have to honor what they say, just acknowledge that that's where they're at right now, and entering into an argument with them to try and change their mind, on both sides of the fence, whether they feel like, whoever feels like they're most right, if they're not agreeable, or if there's a part of them that refuses to acknowledge that there could be something that they don't know, which can require a complete rebuild of like who you are, where you've come from, all your little stories that you like to tell people when you introduce yourselves to them, can rewrite like who you are, your whole identity. So before embarking on trying to convince someone of something that they don't know or they should know, you really need to take that into your programming. And for me, that comes from the heart, where like I'll just feel into a situation, and if I go, could I explain to this person more? Does this person want to know more? And it's usually, I've got something on that I want to share. Can I talk to that? Or words to that effect. You'll have your own word or phrasing that you want to use. So with conspiracy, this is what I'm talking about here, is pejoratives. So nouns that have culturally been created or culturally that have changed. So like symbolism can change over time, where one like hand signal or say any symbol can somehow be changed to something that is no longer what that symbol was. Like three fingers and like what okay used to mean okay, and now it means like some white supremacy thing. So like it's culturally can be redefined, and they can be created to mean something else. And like in some of the meme community, the meme community, like with Peppy the Frog, and how memes can change things. Memes can change culture. Like that shit is powerful. And by powerful, that's neither good nor bad. It just means that you can change culture very quickly with memes. So once at one point something that was highly respected and credible can the next day through memes and the viralness of the internet be changed to something completely different. I'm going to have another sip of water and spill some of it down my top. So with conspiracy and where we're at right now and looking for truth, which we're all trying to find meaning in uncertainty. Like I mentioned this at the start, where we've put the head on such a pedestal, we've put the mind on such a pedestal. When it doesn't have the answers, it thirsts for them. Like it will crave, like a crack addict. It will try and find an answer to something, whether it's in like in a book, the internet, can be some form of mapping system. It could be like astrology or human design. It can be any form of security that we know. It's like, oh, because of this is happening, this is happening. Because this is happening, this is happening. So this is part of the human condition, that whenever that anxiety, whenever that fear comes up, we want to try and find that security. Or we'll find a way to discharge that anxiety or that existential anxiety in another way. It could be like talking to people about stuff, or it could be like cleaning or cooking or gardening. And for me personally, like I'll read a lot. I procrastinate a lot. Like I might go for walks. I will like go out of my way to try and find out if one of my friends has an issue, and I want to talk to them about it. So like we all have ways of like dealing and sitting with avoiding our anxiety and existential anxiety. Um, where this becomes a challenge when we're trying to find meaning in uncertainty is where we look. Sometimes we're just looking to confirm whatever our biases are. And this is where logical fallacies come in. So if you're someone that loves exploring things and loves doing research, if you don't know what a logical fallacy is, and you're trying to communicate to people what you think is truth from what you've researched, then I feel like you're doing it out of integrity. So a logical fallacy is where things like confirmation bias, like ad hominems. So confirmation bias is where like you will choose something that confirms your original hypothesis. Ad hominems, which is where like you'll attack the person instead of attacking the argument. So like if I was to draw an example of like Trump. So Trump might do something that is like controversial, and someone might say, "Oh, Trump is like a womanizer. Trump is like this." Well, that's not the argument that you're having. You actually want to have the argument about what his action was, which might be releasing some kind of policy or doing something that's he's done something that you want to talk about and disagree with, but instead of talking about what he's actually done, you try and discredit him as a person. And this happens on the internet all the time, like by straight away calling somebody a troll, which they may or may not be being. You actually remove any chance of understanding like where the other person is coming from. Same thing with calling someone a conspiracy theorist, or like pro-vaxxer, anti-vaxxer, like all that kind of pejorative, like dehumanizing terms. That's an ad hominem attack. So using a pejorative is an ad hominem attack. So you're not actually attacking the argument, you're attacking the person. What other logical fallacies? Slippery slope, where something's happened in the past, so you automatically assume and project that it's going to happen in the future. A classic example of this is when arguing, when people say, "Oh, but it happened with cigarettes." Like, "Oh, doctors said that cigarettes were safe," and sure they did when they first came out. And then that same example is applied to everything that's new technology. Oh, the same thing happened with cigarettes. The doctors said it was safe. It's like, yeah, but are they doing it now? Are they doing it now? So it requires a very large amount of emotional container to be able to hold like those conflicting views and look at it with an eye of like, okay, this may have happened in the past. Is the same? Are we seriously heading down the same path? Or is my confirmation bias or everything else that I've been doing the research on, am I just trying to confirm what my fears are? A lot of this stuff comes from fears. So if you don't know what a logical fallacy is, I've given you a few examples there. I recommend researching it. Research the logical fallacies. And when I say if you want to, like, I'm going to jump in here. I feel like some human design is going to come out right now. So 70% of the population has what's known as like an undefined head, and 50% of the population have an undefined ajna. So if you have an undefined head, which you're 70% of the population are, you are not really geared to be doing research. You might feel a pressure to try and understand things, and like you're actually living out your not self if you are doing that. You are not here to like do what the other 30% is supposed to do, or is better at doing, which is having a constant and consistent way of looking at things. So someone with a defined head can look at a problem and research in a way that can take into account the logical fallacies, can take into account all of these things and present a sound, grounded argument, as opposed to shotgunning ideas left, right, and center. And then for the undefined ajna, it's a 50-50 split. 50% of us have defined ajna, 50% of us have an defined ajna. That's how you conceptualize things. So if you have a defined ajna, you have a constant way of how you think about things, how you construct solutions to things. So if you have an undefined, you can be a little bit more abstract of how you construct things. However, you're very prone to conditioning. So if you're around people that have defined ajnas, then you might be thinking about what they're thinking. Anyway, long human design reading short, is that some of you are just not built for researching and you should fucking stop it. Or don't, just having another sip of water. Or don't, and continue living out your not self, burning out energy, and like spending time looking at things that aren't necessarily needed to be looked at. Or trying to find solutions to things, or trying to find grounding in things that if you just like stopped and like sunk into nature, sunk back into like doing like meditation or whatever it is that you connect to the powers that be, the source or source energy or whatever it is, you'll find that it doesn't matter. Now, I'm going to be branching all over the place in this one. So, absence of evidence. Now, where to start with this? This is going to be interesting. There's a lot of healing modalities. There's a lot of things that go unexplained on the earth. And there's this sentiment, like particularly in the scientific community, where it's like, if there's no evidence, then it can't be real. It doesn't exist. And I feel like that's taking it a little bit too far. And by all means, they're allowed to have their opinions on that. However, like where we're at right now, is around a 6-year half-life on knowledge. And I think I've mentioned this in other podcasts before, where in 6 years, half of the knowledge that we thought we knew was like true and like 100% factual and, you know, it'd be unquestioned. Half of that would be unquestioned and shown to be untrue or needed to be revised. So just let that sink in for a minute. A 6-year half-life on knowledge. So I feel like humans that love to stand by science as like this grounded, like, no, we know this, you know, it's not been proven, or all the kind of energy that comes behind like, this is right and you are wrong. Having a little bit of humility and humbleness in that you don't know, we don't really know, and then within the next 6 years, whatever that was could be like identified as something that's not as true as it was. Now, anecdotal evidence is credited as being a very low value evidence. So the highest value evidence is like double blind. There's actually a really cool pyramid on evidence tree and the quality of evidence. And anecdotal is like quite low on that pyramid of evidence. And like in the healing communities and in a lot of like these, I'm going to call them conspiracy, because otherwise it's very challenging to like reword something that already has like a bracketing around humanity. So in the conspiracy world, there's a lot of anecdotal stuff, and a lot of people that are in the healing arts will know that anecdotal is like, you start seeing stuff over a long enough period before it becomes true. It's like, well, you know, this technique that I used on this person at work, I kept using the same technique on multiple people, and the technique works. Anecdotal. So when you're trying to communicate that to somebody else, this is why testimonials are so important for like certain healing modalities, where it's like the science says this is impossible, like with acupuncture and like kinesiology and homeopathic medicine. So there's people swear by it, and we also know that placebos work. A lot of the antidepressants that are on the market right now, if you did the same studies again, you'd find that placebos work, like quote unquote work. So it's the person changing their thinking, or person believing that they're being healed by something heals them. So there's something in that your beliefs can modify your physical body, your ailments. And then I've seen testimonials from people that have received all kinds of energetic healings, and like, for my scientific brain goes, how the sweet fucking God, how has this person been healed? It makes absolutely no sense. And so you can take that back to a doctor, and the doctor might say, you know, well, the diagnosis was incorrect. You know, there was something that was wrong on the X-ray, or there was something. So when you take things that are miraculous back to a scientific realm, it's very challenging for them to sit with that dissonance. So the dissonance is on both sides of the fence when it comes to accepting contradictory evidence or contradictory information. Research. Now, a lot of people throw the research term around like it's some kind of credibility. Oh, I've spent thousands of hours in research. I've done this research. Do your research. Research. And it's another like, it's another kind of like half pejorative. It's like you're trying to say like, do your research. Like, I've done research. So automatically it gives you're assuming that you have credibility. And people assume that you have credibility because you've done all this quote unquote research. Now, if you want to research well, you need to research both sides of the spectrum with humility, reverence, and a curiosity. And in order for you to get to that curious stage, you need to admit that what you know could be wrong. So when somebody tells me like, oh, can you give me a citation for that? What's the citation? Like, where's the link? Like, source. It's like, well, okay, I'll give you, like, for me, I always say, I'll give you the source if you are willing to admit that you could be wrong, or this source could be contradictory to what you already know. Otherwise, it purely becomes an academic exercise, and the person on the receiving end tends to just want to move the goalposts. They'll try and find something that's, wrong in the article, or something that's going to discredit the article, whether like the researcher was connected to somebody else, or follow the money is always another good one, where the assumption is that yes, money has the ability to corrupt people, and both consciously and unconsciously. And there's also an assumption that the person doing the research is unethical and biased, which means that in the mirror, that you're that. So your shadow also has an element of that, where like you will justify, depending on where you're getting money from, that it's okay. Like, I can do this because I'm getting money from this, or whatever it is. Like, there's a lot of this, the truth, the untruth, conspiracies, and there's a lot of shadow to all of this, where by projecting what you think you know onto the other, that you're there's something in you that's missing. That doesn't mean we don't stand up for what we think is incorrect or unjust, or we should speak out when your heart says to speak out, not the fear, the anxiety, or the stress. When your heart says this is something that needs to be shared, and you share it from a place of reverence and grace. It's I forgot where I was going with that. So credibility. Now, credibility, we assume that someone who has a PhD or is a professor or has got credibility, and on these forms of credibility, it's like the emperor has no clothes. Like you'll have like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's got like a PhD in astrophysics, will be talking about biology, or we might have someone that's done a doctorate in like theology talking about biology as well. I think about Vinada Shiva, Dr. Vinada Shiva. She's like someone that's very against like genetic modification and in India and seed saving and all this kind of stuff. And however, like she uses doctor in her name when she talks about biology. However, her doctorate is in theology. So there's this. Like I feel that's out of integrity, because there's an omission of information. Like, just putting doctor in front of your name does not mean that you have any additional credibility on what you are talking about. And this comes down to abdication of authority, where in the Matrix, the 3D world, we give credibility to these names, these things that we put in front of professor, doctor, sir, all these prefixes that we put in front of names, or that imply that this person has achieved some level of status, so they become unquestionable. And then that translates over into the military realm with uniforms, where we feel like if someone has a uniform on, there's almost an automatic abdication of authority. And this has been proven. This has been shown psychologically that when someone is in a uniform, they're more likely to be trusted. It's the bias of being human. Is that if you dress someone up in a lab coat, maybe wrap a stethoscope around their neck, and they give you, like, look you really seriously in the eye and give you some advice, you'll listen to what they have to say. So it's scary when you start questioning like how and who you abdicate your authority to. So when you go to the doctor, like, how do you know that that person behind that desk is actually the person that has the credentials up on the wall? And how do you know that those credentials up on the wall aren't just part of a part of a counterfeit ring? Just a just to spook you out, But this brings up a lot of questions about credibility and discernment. And I feel like there's a lot of discernment that comes from the heart, and that's where I feel like we need to move to as a collective. Is that your heart has the ability to discern if someone has their best intentions for you and whether or not you should trust that information. So there is a safety in knowing. And when you can admit that to yourself, that there's part of you that enjoys knowing, part of you enjoys, there's almost like a level of superiority in knowing, which is a shadow value, wanting to feel superior. And I have that. Like, it's been something that I've struggled with most of my fucking adult life, is just speaking from the heart and not wanting to like crush someone with my mind. It's there's safety in knowing, and there's safety in, and there's credibility in being seen as someone that is smart and being approached by people that don't know. So there's an element of groundedness that can come from someone that you can go to that knows the answers to your questions. And then for the person on the receiving end, there's a calming in knowing. So if I was to use like the current quarantine and lockdown, like frantically looking around on various forums to try and find out what's really going on, like there's actually a safety in knowing, and it can make you quite angry depending on what you find. Like it throws up more questions, then you end up going down like this rabbit hole of like trying to find like some stable piece of information so you can sleep at night. And it's challenging, it's really challenging to be able to sit in the unknowing. And I feel like as part of like a yoga and as part of a spiritual practice, being able to sit in that unknowing gives you tremendous power. Gives you an amazing strength to wade into any situation. And for me personally, like I'm used to chaotic situations in my corporate career. Like chaos was a daily thing. Like whether a job came up out of nowhere or someone was sick, or like there was always an element of chaos that needed to be sat in and solved. And until you can acknowledge when you sit in that chaos, like you could do it right now. As I take another sip of water, like just picture a really chaotic event in your life. You can go back there right now and just drop into your heart, breathe into your heart. If you're starting to feel a bit stressed, just take your breath back. It's your fucking breath, your lungs. You own it. Take it back. And as you're sitting in like that stressful, chaotic situation, just allow it all to just watch yourself in that, like a time lapse. So everything just speeding forward, and you're in the middle of it like a Zen monk, just taking it all in, just watching it. And it's in that clarity where the solutions are found. It's in that clarity where you have the discernment of whether or not you need to act, whether or not you need to share that Facebook post, whether or not you need to wear an A-frame and walk down the main street of your town with a sign protesting your rights. So it comes down to you. And when you abdicate authority, we can get swept up in movements that aren't for us. And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of movements that aren't for us. There's a element of guilt and shame that can be put on people that don't know. Like, especially when you call people like sheeple or like zombies, or like for my one, I call them agents, where like you do something that's against the current narrative, like breaking quarantine, like saying something that's contradictory to the mainstream media tagline or party line, and you get attacked. Like there's when someone says something contradictory, like, you know what, I think vaccines there's something that we've missed in vaccines. Like, the technology is old and we haven't really revised it to find other alternative methods for either delivery or creation. Just something that we've just relied on because the pipeline is there to create them. So why reinvent the wheel? Like, part of the biology is there, and why change it? So there's parts of that in particular. I'm going to jump into vaccines now. God, all right. So, like, talking about vaccines, like I've got family that we've worked in. I think I've mentioned this in other podcasts. I've got family that work in biotech and that have that are knowledgeable in biology. Then you see what I did there. So that's just logical fallacy wise, and just being aware of biases, is that I've assumed that I know what I'm talking about by associating myself with people that have got a qualification. So that's a bias, just pointing that out. Now, it can be used as like a bias. So it gives me credibility. Now, so like in biotech, it's very money driven, and it's not there's one person that's making all the decisions. It becomes a group of people, and it could be like bad apples versus bad barrels, where the people at the front lines really want to help people, and they're using whatever the science that they were taught in high school, college, university, wherever they've got their qualifications, to create cures, antidotes for things that are troubling humanity right now. This is a fact that might shake a few of you up, is that a lot of the medicine that's out there is purely for lifestyle illnesses, and they're the biggest cash cow for a lot of the pharmaceutical companies. So if you want to change your lifestyle, you will change the pipeline, the money pipeline for pharmaceutical companies. So anyway, in biotech, like, they're trying to work on new things, and the larger organizations might buy up like patents for things, or startup companies that have come up with new cures or antidotes or ways of creating a medicine, and shelve it. And I feel like this is a crying shame, and it doesn't matter what fucking ism you want to try and put on it, whether it's capitalism, communism, socialism. All systems rely on the human, and I've spoken about this in another podcast, where like humans will choose the path of least resistance. So if there's a risk of that you are going to lose like a large product line to something else, or the marketing costs of trying to market something new when something else already got a foothold in the market, then you may as well just shelve it, buy it and shelve it. And the way drugs are need to be tested is that there's a lot of effort involved. There's a lot of effort involved in trying to the red tape that's required to push medicines through is really involved, and it's very expensive. And like no pharmaceutical is safe. So there's no such thing as a safe pharmaceutical. They're all under stage 3 because something can change. There's someone can have an adverse effect to some kind of medicine, and it can get pulled off the market. So there's always a risk. Like that. There's a hazard that's there, and the risk is a degree of how much risk there is. So 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 7 out of 10, 1 out of 10, whatever it is, there's always a risk. The hazard that it's going to hurt someone is always there, and the risk is like how you play the odds. Now, in biology, in particular with vaccines, where like the immunology of how vaccines work seems sound, quote unquote, where you introduce like a dead virus into the body, and the body reacts like it's got the virus, and it creates the antibodies for it. It like preloads the body for if you got a full blown version of the virus, and this is where viral load comes in, where depending on how much your body is ingests of the virus or how quickly it generates it, that's the viral load. So by getting a little bit of a dead virus, your body like gets almost like a Kickstarter, almost like a bootstrap, kind of like it's got like a leg up, so it knows when it gets a full blown version of the virus, it's already prepared. So you might still get the virus, however, your symptoms will be much lesser, and there's a good chance that you will. Sorry, the types of symptoms that you have will be lesser, and the duration of how long you have the symptoms for will be much lesser as well. So that's the theory behind vaccines. Now, what tends to be the wedging point in vaccines is what else is carried inside it, and this is where like you see like formaldehyde and mercury and like toxicology 101 is the dosage makes the poison. So even like water is toxic. Even like even like nutmeg, cinnamon, like the dosage makes the poison. So so when it comes to vaccines, and the fear of them being directly injected into the blood is like, well, you're injecting like adjuvants. Oh my god, I can't even say the freaking word. Things that help keep the virus alive and things that help you get it in the bloodstream. There, keep the virus from just keep the virus preserved in whatever the vials are, and then helps it get into the bloodstream. So those two things are where we're at right now with the technology. And for some of the viruses, some of the vaccines, we move from using mercury. It's not the kind of mercury that you think it is. It's a different type of mercury. The devil's in the detail. The devil's always in the detail. And then formaldehyde, like we actually have formaldehyde in our body anyway. However, the concern is that it's injected straight into the body, and I can understand that. I can understand that legitimate fear about like, well, all the other medicines and things get like a double-blind placebo trial. Like, why haven't any long-term trials been done on vaccines? And that's a fucking legitimate question. Because when we look at like, I think it was the HPV vaccine or Gardasil, there's been correlation for people that get myalgic encephalomyelitis. Myalgic encephalomyelitis. Try saying that 3 times fast. And that's the severe end of chronic fatigue syndrome, and that affects mostly women. And to try and backtrack that to when they had a virus as a child, when they had the vaccine as a child, is really challenging, because you've got so many different points of influence in their lifetime. It's like you can't really tie it back to a single event. And at the moment, like, you're looking at vaccine companies like they're immune to being prosecuted. There's no accountability there for trying to tease apart, like, well, did this vaccine cause some form of mental illness, syndrome, complex chronic illness? And I feel like that's where people want to see some accountability. Just bump my microphone stand again, flailing my hands around like a maniac. Now, so for the people that are pro-vaccine, and I feel like it's important to look at medicine that needed to be created for how we live. So if you look at, we've moved to agriculture. When we stepped into agriculture and we started living more closely with animals, that's why we needed like vaccines. So I feel like it's a medicine that a style of medicine that has some kind of historical importance, and we need to hold that in like this container of possibility, where it's like, okay, so the anti-vaxxers, like just calling all vaccines bad and all vaccines are shit. I feel like there's a part of you that needs to acknowledge that you are here today because of vaccines. And if you knew anyone that had polio or spent any time in an iron lung, I feel like if you want to do some research, I feel like exploring that as to why we had the polio vaccine. Um, and I'm not saying that the polio vaccine was without any kind of side effect, because there's actually correlation with like Epstein-Barr and chronic fatigue syndrome again, where it's like there's this trying to tease apart this truth and lies, or just ignorance, or like I'm just being able to admit, like, you know what, both sides have got some truth and both sides have got something that needs a bit more clarity, and we just need to approach it from a constructive point of view. um and then so with vaccines in general, I feel pro-vax. Like how do you feel about like a vaccine schedule that on a newborn, when we don't really understand the viral load on a newborn, where they might be given a rapid set of dead viruses, and you don't really know how that newborn's going to react immunology wise, coupled with that like breast milk and some of the baby formula already has like some forms of antibodies in there for the child. So I feel like this the reductionist view, which I feel like the scientific lens has, where we try and break everything down into like the smallest components, needs to like just take a breather and look at things at a bit more collectively and go, hey, you know what, I know we've used this technology for like 50, 60, 70 years. Actually, I have no idea how long vaccines have been around for. 1800s? I have no idea. And just review it. Like, I feel like it takes a lot of humility to go, hey, you know what? Okay, cool. Let's review it. What's going on here? Like, what other things are we looking at here? And if you want to look at it like a herd, like herd immunity, and then like statistics, you know, if like one in 100,000 babies are going to have some kind of adverse effect, I feel like we can do better than that. I feel like we can look at ways of simultaneously having the lifestyles that we have and have the medicine that can support us in a constructive way. And then if you are anti-vax, like as I mentioned before, it's like you need to have the humility to acknowledge that there's a big part of you that's gotten this far on the back of vaccines. And that can be a bitter pill for a lot of people to swallow. And that there's something called survivorship bias, where like if you've had a child or someone in your family that's never been vaccinated and you feel like, oh, that they're okay, that's a bias. So your circle of influence, or your circle of people that are around you, just because that you've survived, doesn't necessarily mean that you are any safe, or that you have some kind of credibility in saying that you haven't been sick. So as humans, there are a lot of biases that can restrict us from thinking about things at a very high level. Also with like the anti-vax component, like if you're going to approach people in like that the space of fear and anger, that your rights are being taken away, and you can't sit with like the unknowing or someone pushing their opinion on you, then you're not going to be speaking from a heart place, and you're not going to create the bridges that we need in order to move forward as a civilization. So I feel like a lot of anti-vaxxers are quite spiritual. They do walk in the realms of like either Zen or yoga or some form of like spiritual practice, and like just getting angry about it is not going to bridge the gap. However, being aware of your biases, being aware of like any underlying hatred towards authority, or like scientific, the black and whiteness of scientific literature and how that works, and then also being able to hold in that same container how money affects people, particularly when, like, if you look at how research grants are provided. Like, I feel like the grant system needs a serious like rework, and how we publish also needs a rework. Like, studies that fail, studies that don't, studies that don't have the outcome that the original hypothesis was, don't always get published, because publishing a study gives you credibility, and publishing a study that approved your hypothesis gives you even more credibility. So there's like, so in this scientific world, there's like, I feel there's a lot of compassion that needs to be required in their realm, the same way like artists need compassion. So it's like the divide and conquer mentality that's being pushed at the moment doesn't help anyone. Like, scientists need to do things that feel like that. Like, not all scientists, like, I tell you what, like, if a scientist could just earn like a wage and do research on whatever the fuck they wanted to research on, you'd have a happy scientist. You'd have a happy researcher, happy scientist, happy human. Same way if you had someone, an artist, that was just like, you should go create music, art, like whatever you feel like you need to express yourself, the world, whatever it is, you just go and do that. You will find another happy human. So in the middle, we've got like this matrix, this script of like, well, something's not working here. And that's when you come together. Like, that's when, like, you have like the spiritual world and the scientific world coming together. The issue isn't the humans it is, because there's a shadow component there around like doing things that are out of integrity for money and survivor and to survive. But there's also something that's much bigger than what they are, which is actually like a core issue. So I feel like there's a lot that both sides of like the spiritual realm and the scientific realm can learn from each other. So in scientific research, like, you've got to apply for things that you might not necessarily agree with, and you might have to do research on things like pay your dues in order to get the grant that you want to get, in order to research something that is life-changing, that is worthwhile. So the way grants are currently asked, like, and currently bidded on, I feel like that could do, like, systems-wise, we could do with some work on that. Like, let's find a new way of like long-term study of vaccines, long-term study of what other ways can we introduce foreign viruses or foreign things into the body to give a leg up on the immune system. And things like, when we say like boosting your immune system, like I feel like that's a misnomer as well. That you can't boost your immune system. You can give it additional resources that it might need to create antibodies. However, like, the immune system is in balance. So if you have an overactive immune system, you have an autoimmune disease, and if you have an underactive immune system, you have an immune deficiency. So, like, the fallacies and way we market things, and there's a rich this is on both sides of the fence. So I think the more ownership that we can take for our tribe, the more we'll be able to grow as a species and a civilization. Because that's why the aliens aren't coming down, people. Now, speaking of aliens, unidentified flying objects. So, like, this has been, like, this come out in the news, like, the Pentagon's released some footage of unidentified flying objects, and there's also submersible objects too. So there's like objects in the ocean that the military has seen and isn't quite explained around. There's submersibles, craft that are underwater as well, that we don't quite understand. And this doesn't mean that there are aliens. It doesn't mean, like, because again, Like, we want to know. Like, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there around aliens, and for me personally, I feel like we aren't alone in the universe, and that could be a scientific or a spiritual belief. So depending on which team you want to be in, because there's plenty of people that are we're a mixed bunch. Fuck humanity, the cosmic joke. Like, you might find like a pro-vaxxer, and it also feels like we're not alone in the universe. The UFOs are real, and then you might have an anti-vaxxer who thinks like UFOs, you're a lunatic. You think that we have aliens. So, like, all the camps will have some kind of overlap, like a Venn diagram. But at the core, we're just fucking human beings trying to find solutions for shit and wanting to feel free. So with UFOs, like, just having another sip of water. With UFOs and like a lot of the information that's out there at the moment, like, it's been redacted, and so we see like military personnel being told to like not report stories, or like you'll be seen as crazy if you report stories, or whatever it is. So it's like straight away there's a threat of like removing your credibility. Again, it like comes back to like, oh, you get labeled with something and you lose credibility. And for a man in particular, like, losing your credibility could mean like losing your ability to attract a partner. Because credibility, with the more credibility you have, the tendency, the more money that you make, and the more money that you make, the more secure you look as a partner. And in a heterosexual relationship, like, typically the person who has more credibility earns more money. That's just how it rolls. So if you identify yourself as a protector or a provider, and then you risk losing credibility or losing status, or if you want to be a whistleblower and like you're not protected, like in Australia in particular, whistleblower protection is quite rubbish. There's less than likely that you're going to speak out, because like your family will be at risk, your happiness will be at risk. So anybody that wants to step out and speak about something that they feel like is out of integrity, like, I feel like it's something that could be attended to. And again, it's like, when you speak out, like, agents come at you. So if you're in an organization that when you speak out, like, there's like a house of cards toppling over, and agents come out of the woodwork to like say you're treasonous, say you're this, say you're that, like, or whatever it is, to discredit you and put you in prison, or put you wherever it is that you feel like, what they feel like is justice. However, completely overlooking that you are the one that's in integrity. You are the one that feels like this is enough, and I got to speak up. I got to speak my truth. Like, this is enough. We've done this enough. This epoch has protected this bullshit story, this bullshit narrative for long enough, and now someone needs to speak up, and I'm going to put my hand up and be the one that speaks up. So a lot of the things that get redacted, in the name of like national security, is because like people can't deal with their fucking fear. So, and we prove that time and time again, like when we lose our shit, when we can't control something. When you're afraid, you are easily manipulated. You do things like the toilet paper thing. Like, humans that are in positions of power or authority, like the military, when they look at the populace going like, you lunatics, like randomly grabbing toilet paper of all the things you need to get. Like, we do it to ourselves. So, like, if I was in charge, I'd be like, there's no point in telling these people this. They're still stuck in like religious narratives. Like, they still feel like sex is a bad thing. Like, it needs to be like saved. Like, concepts around like virginity, like church and religion in general. Like, there's no way that you would release like things that would completely contradict those narratives. No, I wouldn't. Not unless the population could show me some restraint. Like, do some shadow work. like sit in that fear, sit in that unknowing, I would be keeping it all silent. I would be redacting everything, because there's a cost to the truth, and and there might be some of you out there that the anarchist types, which I see where you're coming from, and there's also a shadow of chaos in that, where it's like there's an element of like frustration. There could be an element of like fuck them all, like kill them all and let God sort them out. And I feel that's shadow as well. And there's a level of malevolence in that, where it's like it's about you, like you are being impatient. You feel like your life is more important than somebody else's, and that's on all sides of the fences as well, especially when it comes to pro-vax and anti-vax. Like in that world, there's an element of like your life is more important than somebody else's life, or your quality of life is more important than somebody else's quality of life. There's a rich tapestry that needs to be unstitched there, which is a long conversation and can only be broached if both parties are willing to explore the possibility that they're both wrong, and that there's some truths that can be extracted and explored to move us forward into a more coherent civilization. Mental embarrassment. I'll briefly touch on this. So there's like not knowing. There can be a lot of embarrassment in not knowing. Like I've got friends that say, like when I say, "Oh, I don't know that," and it's, "Oh, really? You didn't know that?" It's like, "Fuck's sake! I just said I didn't know that." Like it's like there's this assumption that like you are supposed to know everything, and like you aren't allowed to have some humility and go, "Oh, well, I didn't know that." Like you try it with me. Just say it. "Oh, I didn't know that." Oh, right. Thank you. I didn't know that. Like, thank you for letting me know. I didn't understand that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that before just then. And then just feel it. I didn't know that. Or I could be wrong. I could be wrong about this. And just feel into those, because it's the humility that I feel like we need in order to have these discussions. And this, when the people start doing, it'll flow up to people in authority, including like police force, military, frontline personnel, all the way into politicians and our leaders. And whenever it starts with the people, it starts with you. It starts with you being able to acknowledge that what you know might not be all that you know. Like, who are you when you are not you? Who are you when you bow your head below your heart and acknowledge that, you know what, the knowledge that's got me this far, excuse me, that there might be something that I don't know about this. And I'll jump back into like the current quarantine is like we're so desperate to get back to work, and we're so desperate to feel safe again, that we will accept solutions that aren't really thought through. We not being unable to sit with the fear of like not having any work, not having any money, not having whatever it is challenging. Like if you've lost your job, that shit is fucking tough. If you're waiting on Centrelink or some form of government assistance for finance, and they haven't gotten back to you, or you're outside some ridiculous bracket, so you can't get it. You've got to jump through some more hoops. That shit is tough. So you definitely have my compassion on that. However, for those of us that are sitting pretty, that are waiting for everything to return back to quote unquote normal, even though it'll never be normal again, it just requires a bit of humility to acknowledge that the people that are giving you the solutions aren't qualified to give solutions. So if you're looking at like politicians in general and people in authority, like they're going to have the same struggles with chaos that you do. They're going to be frantically asking people in around them, like, what is going on? How do I fix this? And also looking to the future to make sure that their life is secure or their party is secure. So these are, when you understand these biases, when you understand like the human condition and the shadow, it gives you an element of foresight into your own behavior and also what else could be going on in other people. Where like someone in a political party might just be looking to extend their longevity in that party, or extend like the credibility of the party. Of like, do you remember the great pandemic of 2020 and how we navigated that? It's like, come on, man! Like, you copied another nation. You just copied what everybody else was doing and then called it your own. It's not really very creative. Or you gave half solutions. I know in Australia, the teaching in particular, they refused to close down the schools, and which didn't give teachers enough time to prep. And so, being worried about like a child's education, which was the party line, was being worried about a child's education. Like there was weeks there where there was no checks and balances on what was being taught. There was no checks and balances whether it was tied to the curriculum. So it was like, this is where like the emission of truth, where like everyone was like lapping it up. Oh no, we need to not close the schools because of education. Imagine if the child doesn't get educated, they can't get a job, they can't get a job, they can't be a productive member of society. So there's this whole cascade of like matrix programming that keeps certain systems in place. When you look at the truth of the matter, I actually look at the truth of the matter or look at what was really going on. It's like everyone was just throwing solutions out there to shut everybody else up. Because the minute you get that pacifier, that dummy that stops you from panicking, you'll do anything. And if you can admit that, I feel like this podcast has been very beneficial. So if you got this far and it felt like it resonated with you, or you want to share it with somebody else because it resonated with somebody else that you might know, or someone that's like always on the pro-vax, anti-vax, like conspiracy, the scientific bandwagon that one is more truer than the other. Like, I think both sides of that fence just need to have like a humility pill and acknowledge like that the root core of it all is that you're looking for safety and you're afraid. And then once you feel into that, once you acknowledge that and have the humility to feel into that science is ever evolving, and that things that worked a long time ago need to be reviewed. And I feel like there is a responsibility to review that. And those that are in positions of power that design policy, that is what my recommendation is. And then those that are anti-science or anti-technology in general, that you are here today and you are using technology today that has come off of many sacrifices, many health sacrifices. And I feel like you need to sit with that dissonance as well, like properly sit with it, like actually like go into it and go, you know what? There's a good chance that my grandma or granddad had the polio vaccine, or they were in a fucking iron lung, and I am here because of that. So if you don't value your life, then by all means don't do it. But if you do value your life and you value the experiences that you've had, like the friends that you've connected with, the relationships that you've had, like you really need to sit in the humility of that. There's technology that existed that you might not agree with today that's gotten you into the body that you're in now. And we still need to do more research, I feel, to make sure that there's accountability all the way back up that chain. Like if there's no accountability, then people will rush things that aren't beneficial for humanity, just beneficial for the bottom dollar. and I'm just doing my job, or if it was that department's responsibility, we have seen played out again and again and again and again, and we're about to see it again in the financial sector. So it always boils back to the individual, and where you're willing to keep your integrity, where you're willing to be honorable, where you're willing to be ethical. And if you're looking to somebody else to get your moral fortitude from, I feel like it does you a disservice. I feel like it's a pernicious path that you need to step away from. Where do you stand? Where does your heart stand? Reset. Like there's a large portion of the population that knows this. They feel this. They feel this ethical and moral dilemma. And I feel like more of us need to speak up and talk about that, the truth that's in that. Talking about pro-vax, anti-vax, all the pro-science, anti-science, conspiracy theory, all that kind of stuff. And if it's not in your heart, if it's coming from your head, you're doing a disservice, because you're not actually speaking your truth. And it's like a false guide. It's like a spiritual loosh. It's like a fake objective, a fake directive that's not you. And it's pulling you away. It's the us versus them mentality. And all you really need to do is sit with your emotion and find out what is on your heart that you need to share. And it could just be it could be something that is completely in opposite of what you're doing right now. And you need to acknowledge that and feel that and surrender to that you will need to make some sacrifices in order to make that happen, because that's what you're here to do. You need to remember who you are, and that is what you need to bring to the earth. That was a 10-minute digression. So again, if you got this far, the additional 6 minutes of me ranting, speaking my truth, yo, share it, like it, do all the things that you know you need to do in order to get some more traction on this podcast. And if you've got something that you'd like me to talk about or explore more or go into a bit more detail on in this podcast or on Fallacy or Instagram, then let me know. Otherwise, it's been an absolute pleasure talking about this. I'm going to have another drink of water. Thank you, Cassie. And I will talk to you all more in the next one. Sending you so much love. Thank you so much. Sending so much love, and I thank you so much for listening to me and what I have to say. And big love. Bye.